The moment Jake Crawford heard the old woman's rattling breath in the dusty room above the saloon, he knew death had finally come to collect what it was owed, and with it, a secret that would shatter everything he thought he knew about his past. The summer of 1883 burned hot across the Arizona territory, turning the ground to cracked leather and the sky to beaten copper. Jake had been working the Double R Ranch for 3 years now, saving every dollar he could scrape together, dreaming of the day he could buy his own spread. At 24 years old, he was lean and weathered, his hands calloused from rope and leather, his eyes sharp from watching cattle and reading the land. The town of Copper Ridge sat at the base of red stone cliffs, a collection of wooden buildings that seemed to lean on each other for support against the relentless wind. He had received the telegram that morning while mending fence wire in the north pasture. It was from Doc Henderson, brief and urgent. Mabel Thornton dying, asking for you, come now. Jake had stared at those words for a long moment, his heart suddenly heavy. Mabel Thornton. He had known her all his life, the woman who ran the boarding house, who had given him food when he was a hungry boy, who had looked at him with eyes that held both sadness and something he could never quite name. But why would she ask for him now, at the end? He rode into town as the sun climbed toward noon, tying his horse outside the saloon where Mabel kept a room on the second floor. The streets were quiet, most folks seeking shade during the worst of the heat. Doc Henderson met him at the bottom of the stairs, his face grave beneath his white mustache. She does not have long, son, the doctor said quietly. Her heart is giving out, but she has been asking for you since yesterday, says she has something she needs to tell you before she goes. Jake felt his throat tighten. What is it? She would not say, only that it has to be you who hears it. Doc Henderson put a hand on Jake's shoulder. Whatever it is, boy, she has carried it a long time. Be kind. The room was dim, curtains drawn against the harsh light. Mabel lay in the narrow bed, her face as pale as the pillow beneath her head. She had always been a sturdy woman, strong and capable, but now she looked small and fragile, her breathing labored. Her eyes opened when Jake pulled the chair close to the bed, and something like relief crossed her features. Jake, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You came. Of course I came, Miss Mabel. He took her hand, shocked at how cold it felt despite the heat. Doc says you wanted to see me. She nodded slightly, her eyes filling with tears. I should have told you years ago. I was afraid of what people would say, afraid of losing you, afraid of so many things, but I cannot die with this secret. Jake felt his pulse quicken. What secret? Mabel drew in a shaky breath, and when she spoke, her words came slowly, each one seeming to cost her dearly. Your mother, Jake, Ellen Crawford. She did not die in childbirth like everyone told you. The words hit him like a physical blow. His whole life he had been told that his mother died bringing him into the world, that his father had drunk himself to death a year later from grief. He had grown up an orphan, passed between families, never quite belonging anywhere. What are you saying? Ellen did not die, Jake. She lived. She had to give you up, but she lived. Tears ran down Mabel's weathered cheeks. And I am her. I am your mother. The room seemed to tilt. Jake stared at the woman in the bed, his mind refusing to accept what his ears had just heard. That is not possible. You have been here my whole life. I have known you since I was a boy. I have been here your whole life, Mabel said, her grip tightening on his hand with surprising strength. Watching you grow up, unable to hold you, unable to tell you the truth. Your father, Thomas Crawford, he was a good man, but he was married to another woman when we fell in love. I was young and foolish, working in the boarding house even then. When I realized I was carrying you, Thomas wanted to leave his wife, but I could not let him do that. She was barren, you see, and it would have destroyed her. So we made a plan. Jake felt as though he could not breathe. What plan? Thomas told everyone that his wife was with child. She wore padding, played the part, and when my time came, I went away to a cabin outside town. Thomas brought his wife there, and when you were born, they took you. Everyone believed you were theirs. Ellen Crawford, they called her, Thomas's wife. She raised you as her own for the first 5 years of your life. But everyone said she died when I was born, Jake managed to say, his voice hoarse. That was the story we told after the real Ellen, Thomas's wife, died when you were 5. She had been thrown from a horse. We told people she died in childbirth years earlier to explain why I had stayed in town, to make the timeline make sense to anyone who might have been counting months. And Thomas, he was never the same after she died. The guilt ate at him. He started drinking, and you know how that story ended. Jake did know. His father had fallen off his horse drunk when Jake was 6 years old, breaking his neck. After that, Jake had been shuffled between families, always the extra mouth to feed, always the charity case. And all that time, his real mother had been right there, watching him, unable to claim him. Why did you not tell me after he died? The question came out more harshly than he intended, but he felt raw, turned inside out. Mabel's face crumpled. I wanted to, God knows I wanted to, but by then everyone believed the story. If I had claimed you then, people would have known the truth about your father's affair, about the deception. His wife's memory would have been tarnished. And I was afraid, Jake, afraid that you would hate me for giving you up, for lying all those years. So I stayed close, helped when I could, and kept my secret. Jake pulled his hand away, standing abruptly. His legs felt unsteady. Everything he thought he knew about himself, about his history, had just been rewritten. The woman he had known as a kind neighbor, a friend, was his mother. His mother, who had watched him go hungry, watched him wear hand-me-down clothes, watched him work from the time he was old enough to hold a pitchfork. I know you're angry, Mabel whispered. I do not blame you. But I needed you to know before I died. I needed you to know that I loved you, Jake. Every single day of your life, I loved you. It tore me apart not being able to tell you, not being able to hold you when you were hurting. But I loved you. Jake turned to look at her, and what he saw in her eyes made his anger falter. There was such naked pain there, such desperate hope. This woman who had slipped him extra food when she thought no one was looking, who had mended his clothes, who had always had a kind word for him even when others dismissed him as just another orphan. She had been suffering too all these years. He sat back down heavily. I do not know what to say. You do not have to say anything. Her breathing was getting worse, more labored. I just needed you to know the truth. There is a box under my bed. In it, you will find letters I wrote you over the years, letters I never sent. And there is money. More than $2,000. I have been saving it for you since you were born. It is yours. Use it for that ranch you dream about. Jake felt tears sting his eyes. How did you know about that? I have always listened when you talked. I have always paid attention. She reached for his hand again, and this time he let her take it. Can you forgive me, Jake? Can you forgive a foolish woman who made the best choices she could with what she had? He looked at her, really looked at her, and suddenly he could see it. The shape of her eyes was like his, the stubborn set of her jaw, the way her hair, now gray, had once been the same dark brown as his own. How had he never noticed? Or had he simply never looked? I forgive you, he said quietly, and he meant it. The anger was still there, the hurt, the confusion, but beneath it all was something else, a strange sense of relief. He had not been unwanted. He had been loved, even if that love had been hidden. Mabel smiled, and it transformed her face. Thank you, she breathed. That is all I needed. That is everything. They sat together in silence for a while, holding hands while the afternoon light slowly changed beyond the curtained window. Doc Henderson came in once to check on her, then left them alone again. Jake found himself telling her things, stories from his childhood, asking questions about his father, about her, about the life that might have been. She answered when she had the strength, her voice growing weaker with each passing hour. As evening approached, her breathing changed, becoming shallow and irregular. Jake leaned close, fear suddenly gripping him. He had just found his mother, and he could not lose her so quickly. "Do not be afraid," Mabel whispered. "I am ready. I held on just long enough to tell you, just long enough to see you one more time as your mother, not just as old Mabel." "I will miss you," Jake said, his voice breaking, "and I will watch over you from wherever I go." Her hand tightened weakly on his. "Be happy, Jake. Find love. Build that ranch. Live the life I always wanted for you." She closed her eyes then, her breathing slowing until finally it stopped altogether. Jake sat there in the darkening room holding his mother's hand, crying for the first time since he was a small boy. The funeral was 2 days later. Most of the town came, paying respects to a woman they had known as reliable and kind. Jake stood by the grave, looking at the simple wooden marker, and wondered if he should tell people the truth. In the end, he decided to keep her secret. It did not matter now what people thought. What mattered was that he knew. He found the box under her bed, just as she had said. Inside were dozens of letters written in a careful hand, chronicling her thoughts and feelings as she watched him grow. He read them late into the night, learning about the woman who had been his mother, understanding her choices even as they pained him. The money was there too, neatly bundled in a cloth bag, more than enough to make a start on his dream. But Jake found he did not want to stay in Copper Ridge anymore. There were too many ghosts here, too many memories that would never be quite the same. He needed a fresh start, somewhere he could be Jake Crawford without the weight of all the lies and secrets. So he gave his notice at the Double R, sold what few possessions he had, and headed west toward California. He made it as far as a town called Silver Creek in the eastern foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains before his horse threw a shoe. The town was smaller than Copper Ridge, but more prosperous looking, built on mining money, though the easy silver was long gone. A large ranch sprawled across the valley just north of town, and Jake learned from the blacksmith that they were hiring. The owner was a widow named Catherine Brennan, who was struggling to keep the operation running after her husband's death the previous winter. "She is a tough one," the blacksmith said as he worked on Jake's horse, "but fair. Could use a good man who knows cattle." Most of the hands left after old Tom died went looking for easier money. Jake rode out to the ranch the next morning. The place had good bones. He could see that immediately. The pastures were well fenced, the buildings solid even if they needed some maintenance. Cattle dotted the hillsides looking healthy and well-bred, but there was an air of neglect about the place, the kind that comes when there are not enough hands to do all the work that needs doing. He found Catherine Brennan in the barn, struggling with a saddle that had clearly seen better days. She was younger than he had expected, perhaps 26 or 27, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical braid and green eyes that assessed him sharply when he introduced himself. She wore men's trousers and a work shirt, both well worn, and there was a smudge of dirt on her cheek. "You are looking for work?" she asked, setting down the saddle. "I am. I heard you might be hiring." "Depends. What is your experience?" Jake told her about his years at the Double R, about growing up around ranches, about his skill with horses and cattle. He did not tell her about Mabel, about the secret that still sat heavy in his chest. That was private, something he was still learning to carry. Catherine listened, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she nodded slowly. "I can offer $30 a month, food and a bunk in the bunkhouse. Work is hard, and there is a lot of it. I have 4 other hands, but we really need 8 to run this place properly. My husband died in a blizzard last February, and most of the crew left after that. The ones who stayed are loyal, but we are stretched thin." "I am not afraid of hard work," Jake said. "Can you start today?" "Yes, ma'am." Something that might have been relief crossed her face. "Then welcome to the Brennan Ranch. I am Catherine, and you can call me that. We do not stand on formality around here." Jake settled into the rhythm of ranch life quickly. The work was indeed hard, from dawn until well after dusk most days, but it was honest work and he found satisfaction in it. The other hands were welcoming enough, glad to have another strong back to share the load. There was old Pete, who had worked for Catherine's husband for 20 years, a man of few words but deep knowledge. There were the twins, Mark and Matthew, barely 20 years old but fearless with wild horses. And there was Carlos, a Mexican vaquero whose skill with a rope was nothing short of magical. But it was Catherine who surprised Jake the most. She was not content to sit in the ranch house and let the men do all the work. She was out every day, riding fence lines, checking cattle, making decisions. She had a good eye for livestock and a sharp mind for the business side of ranching. More than once, Jake found himself impressed by her knowledge and her determination. What he did not expect was how much he would come to look forward to seeing her each day. There was something about the way she pushed back a stray piece of hair when she was thinking, the way she laughed when Carlos told one of his elaborate stories at dinner, the way her whole face lit up when she talked about the ranch and her plans for it. She was beautiful, Jake realized one evening as they stood watching the sun set over the western hills. But it was more than that. She was strong and smart and kind, and he found himself drawn to her in a way that both excited and terrified him. The problem was he had no idea if she felt anything similar. She was his employer, and more than that, she was a widow still grieving her husband. It would be inappropriate to say anything, to even hint at his growing feelings. So Jake kept them to himself, locked away like Mabel had locked away her secret, and tried to focus on his work. Summer turned to autumn, and the ranch began to show the results of everyone's hard work. Fences were repaired, buildings given fresh paint, cattle moved to better pasture. Catherine even hired 2 more hands, young men from town eager to learn. The place was beginning to feel prosperous again, alive. One October evening, Jake was working late in the barn, cleaning tack by lamplight. Most of the other hands had turned in for the night, exhausted from a long day moving cattle. He heard footsteps and looked up to find Catherine standing in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I saw your light still burning," she said, coming inside and offering him one of the cups. "Thought you might need this." "Thank you." Jake took the cup gratefully, suddenly very aware of how close she was standing. The barn felt smaller somehow, more intimate in the golden lamplight. Catherine sat down on a hay bale, looking tired but content. "I wanted to thank you, Jake, for everything you have done these past months. The ranch looks better than it has in over a year. I could not have done it without you." "You have done the hard part," Jake said. "Keeping this place going on your own, that takes real courage." "I did not feel very courageous most days." She stared into her coffee cup. "After Tom died, I thought about selling, going back east to my family. But this ranch, it is all I have left of him. All I have left of the life we were building together. I could not let it go." Jake sat down beside her, careful to keep a respectable distance. "He would be proud of you, of what you have accomplished." Catherine looked at him then, her green eyes searching his face. "Can I ask you something? You never talk about your past, about where you came from. I know you worked at a ranch in Arizona, but that is all. It feels like you are running from something." Jake felt his chest tighten. He had not talked to anyone about Mabel, about the deathbed confession that had changed everything. But sitting there in the quiet barn with Catherine, he found he wanted to. He wanted her to know him, really know him, even the painful parts. So he told her, all of it. About growing up thinking he was an orphan, about Mabel's confession, about learning that his entire history was built on lies and secrets, about the letters and the money, and the decision to start over somewhere new. Catherine listened without interrupting, her expression soft with sympathy. When he finished, she reached over and took his hand. "I am so sorry, Jake. That must have been devastating." "It was," he admitted. "But also in a strange way, it was a gift. I spent my whole life thinking I was not wanted, that I was a burden. Finding out that my mother loved me enough to watch over me all those years, even from a distance, that changed something. It hurt, but it also healed something I did not even know was broken. And now you are here, starting over. Now I am here." He looked at their joined hands, at the way her fingers had laced with his so naturally. His heart was pounding. "Catherine, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" The words caught in his throat. What if she did not feel the same? What if he ruined this? The best job he had ever had, the best place he had ever been. But he thought of Mabel, of the decades she had spent silent, and he knew he could not do the same. Life was too short, too fragile. If the past months had taught him anything, it was that. "I have feelings for you," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "I know I'm just a hired hand, and you are my employer, and you are still grieving your husband. I know all the reasons this is probably wrong, but I cannot keep pretending I do not feel what I feel. You are the strongest, smartest, most beautiful woman I have ever known, and I am falling in love with you." Catherine's eyes widened, and for a long moment she did not speak. Jake felt his stomach drop. He had ruined everything. But then she squeezed his hand tighter, and a slow smile spread across her face. "Jake Crawford, you are terrible at keeping secrets," she said softly. "I have known for weeks that you felt something. The way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention, the way you always make sure I have the gentler horse when we ride out together, the way you saved me the best piece of meat at dinner." "You knew?" Jake felt heat rise to his face. "I knew." She moved closer until their knees were touching. "And I need you to know something too. Tom was a good man, and I loved him. But our marriage was arranged by our families. We learned to care for each other, to be partners, but it was not the kind of love that songs are written about. When he died, I grieved him, and I missed him. But I also felt guilty because part of me felt free. Does that make me terrible?" "No," Jake said firmly. "That makes you human." "I have been attracted to you since the day you rode up to the barn," Catherine continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "At first I felt guilty about it, like I was betraying Tom's memory. But as the months passed, as I got to know you, I realized that life is giving me a second chance, a chance at real love, the kind that makes your heart race and your breath catch. And I do not want to waste it." Jake felt as though the world had tilted on its axis. "Are you saying?" "I am saying I am falling in love with you too, Jake, and I do not care what anyone in town thinks about it." He kissed her then, unable to stop himself, and she kissed him back with a passion that made his head spin. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Catherine was laughing. "I have wanted to do that for so long," she admitted. "Me too," Jake said, grinning like a fool. "Me too." They courted properly after that, though it was difficult given that they lived on the same ranch and saw each other every day. Catherine insisted on observing the proprieties, wanting to give the town gossips less to chew on. They had dinner together in the ranch house a few times a week, always with the door open. They took rides together on Sunday afternoons, and slowly, carefully, they built something real and solid between them. Jake told her about his dream of owning his own ranch, and to his surprise, Catherine suggested a partnership. "This place is too big for me to run alone, even with hired hands. If we were married, we could run it together, equal partners, and with the money your mother left you, we could expand, buy some of the adjacent land that is coming up for sale." "Married?" Jake's heart leaped at the word. Catherine blushed. "I am getting ahead of myself, but yes, Jake, I would marry you in a heartbeat if you asked me." "Then I am asking." He dropped to one knee right there in the middle of the barn, ignoring the interested looks from the horses in their stalls. "Catherine Brennan, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet and kissing him soundly. "Yes, yes, yes." They were married in the small church in Silver Creek on a cold December day in 1883. The whole town turned out, curious about the young widow marrying her hired hand so soon after her husband's death. But if there was gossip, Jake and Catherine did not care. They were too happy, too in love, to worry about what anyone else thought. Old Pete stood up as Jake's best man, and Catherine's friend Sarah, who owned the general store, stood up as her matron of honor. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Jake felt a sense of rightness settle over him. This was where he was meant to be. This woman was who he was meant to be with. They spent their wedding night in the ranch house in the big bedroom that Catherine had shared with Tom. She had redecorated it entirely, getting rid of all the old furniture and bringing in new pieces. "This is our room now," she told Jake, "our life together. No ghosts." And there were no ghosts. What they found in each other's arms that night was pure and joyful and passionate, a physical expression of the love they had been building for months. Jake had never felt so complete, so wholly himself. Catherine was everything he had ever wanted, and things he had not even known to dream about. The years that followed were good ones. With Jake's investment, they expanded the Brennan Ranch significantly, buying up adjacent properties and increasing their herd. Jake had a natural head for business that complemented Catherine's ranching knowledge. They made a formidable team, and the ranch prospered under their joint leadership. In the spring of 1885, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. Jake was terrified and thrilled in equal measure, his mind full of thoughts of Mabel and all the pain that his own birth had caused. But Catherine held his face in her hands and told him firmly that history was not going to repeat itself. "This baby is going to be born into love and truth, Jake. No secrets, no lies, no shame, just love." Their son was born in October of that year, a healthy baby boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. They named him Thomas Mabel Crawford, honoring both of the people they had lost. Jake held his son for the first time and wept, overwhelmed by the responsibility and the fierce love that flooded through him. He vowed silently that this child would always know he was wanted, always know he was loved. 2 years later, Catherine gave birth to twin girls, red-headed and fierce from the moment they entered the world. They named them Ellen and Rose, and the ranch house was suddenly full of noise and laughter and chaos. Jake loved every minute of it. He had gone from being an orphan with no family to being a husband and father, and the transformation still sometimes took his breath away. On quiet evenings after the children were in bed, Jake would sit on the porch with Catherine and watch the sun set over their land. Sometimes he would tell her stories about Mabel, about the letters she had written, about the mother he had known for such a brief time at the end. Catherine would listen and hold his hand, understanding that the pain of that loss would always be with him, but that it had also shaped him into the man she loved. "Do you think she would be proud?" Jake asked one evening, watching his daughters chase fireflies in the yard while young Thomas tried to keep up on his short legs. "I think she would be overjoyed," Catherine said firmly. "You have everything she wanted for you, a home, a family, land of your own, love, so much love." Jake thought about that, about the deathbed confession that had shattered his world and then, in a strange way, freed him to build a new one. Mabel had given him the truth, painful as it was, and with that truth had come the money and the courage to start over. Without that push, he never would have left Arizona. He never would have come to Silver Creek. He never would have met Catherine. "I wish she could have met you," he said. "I think you two would have liked each other." "I wish I could have met her too," Catherine said. "I would have thanked her for raising such a good man, even if she had to do it from a distance." As the years passed, the ranch continued to thrive. Jake and Catherine added more land, more cattle, and eventually began breeding horses as well. Their children grew strong and healthy, learning to ride almost before they could walk, taking to ranch life with enthusiasm. Young Thomas showed his father's quiet determination and his mother's sharp mind. The twins, Ellen and Rose, were adventurous and bold, always getting into some kind of mischief. In 1890, Jake received a letter from Doc Henderson back in Copper Ridge. The old doctor was retiring and had been going through his papers when he found something he thought Jake should have: A week later, a package arrived containing a photograph Jake had never seen before. It showed a young woman, barely 20, sitting for a formal portrait. She had dark hair and eyes that looked straight at the camera with intelligence and warmth. On the back, in faded ink, was written Ellen Crawford, 1859. But Jake knew it was not Ellen Crawford, Tom's wife. It was Mabel, his mother, captured as a young woman before any of the tragedy and secrets had touched her life. He stared at the photograph for a long time, seeing his own features reflected in hers, understanding for the first time how much of her he carried in his face and in his heart. He had the photograph framed and hung it in the ranch house over the fireplace in the parlor. When the children asked who it was, Jake told them the truth. "That is your grandmother, Mabel. She loved me very much, and I wish you all could have known her." Catherine stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder, as he told the story to their children in simple terms they could understand. No secrets, no lies, just love and truth, the way it should have been from the beginning. By the time Jake turned 40 in 1899, he had become one of the most respected ranchers in the county. The Brennan Ranch, which everyone now called the Crawford Ranch, despite Catherine's name still being on the deed, sprawled across thousands of acres. They employed over 20 men full-time, and their cattle and horses were sought after throughout California and Nevada. But more than the success, more than the money and the land, what mattered to Jake was the family he had built. Thomas was 14 now, already nearly as tall as his father, preparing to go to university in Sacramento in a few years to study animal husbandry. The twins were 12, still wild and fearless, but showing signs of the strong women they would become. And there were 2 more children now, a boy named Peter, who was 7, and a little girl named Grace, who was 4. The house was always full of noise and life, and Jake loved it. On a warm spring evening in 1900, Jake and Catherine sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. The children were all in bed finally, exhausted from a day of helping with the spring branding. Catherine leaned against Jake's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, marveling as he always did at how perfectly she fit against him. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Leaving Arizona? Coming here?" Jake thought about the question seriously, as he always did when Catherine asked him something. He thought about Mabel and her deathbed confession, about the pain and confusion and anger he had felt. He thought about the long ride west, about arriving in Silver Creek with no plan beyond escaping his past. He thought about the first time he had seen Catherine struggling with that saddle in the barn, about the slow building of trust and friendship and love between them. He thought about his children, about the life he had built, about the man he had become. "No," he said finally, "I do not regret any of it, even the painful parts, because all of it led me here, to you, to this life. Mabel gave me the truth at the end, and that truth set me free. Free to leave, free to start over, free to find real love. If she had never told me, I would have stayed in Copper Ridge forever, never knowing who I really was, never finding you. So no, I do not regret it. I am grateful for all of it." Catherine tilted her face up to kiss him, and in that kiss was 17 years of marriage, of partnership, of building a life together through hard work and dedication and love. When they pulled apart, she smiled at him in the twilight, and Jake felt his heart swell with happiness. "I love you, Jake Crawford," she said. "My partner, my best friend, my everything." "I love you too, Catherine Crawford," he replied, using the name she had chosen to take when they married. "Thank you for giving me a family. Thank you for giving me a home." They sat together in the gathering darkness, listening to the sounds of their ranch settling down for the night. Cattle lowing in the distance, horses moving in the corrals, the soft whisper of wind through the grass. Inside the house, their children slept safely, dreaming whatever children dream. And somewhere, Jake liked to think, Mabel was watching over them all, finally at peace with the secrets she had carried for so long. The deathbed confession had changed everything for Jake Crawford. It had shattered the foundation of his identity and forced him to rebuild from the ground up. But in that rebuilding, he had found something more precious than he could have imagined. He had found love real and true and lasting, and he had found partnership and purpose. He had found family, not the one he was born into, but the one he had chosen and built with his own hands and heart. And in the end, that was the greatest gift Mabel could have given him. Not the money, not even the truth itself, but the courage to leave behind everything familiar and strike out in search of something better. She had set him free, and in that freedom, he had found everything he never knew he needed. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky above the ranch, Jake pulled Catherine closer and smiled. Life was good. Life was full. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that this was exactly where he was meant to be. The past had shaped him, but it did not define him. The future was unwritten, full of possibility and promise. And the present, this perfect moment with the woman he loved, was more than enough. Years later, when Jake was an old man, his children would ask him about his mother, about Mabel, and the secret she had kept for so long, and he would tell them the whole story, holding nothing back. He would tell them about the pain and the confusion, but also about the love, about a woman who had sacrificed everything, including her own relationship with her son, because she thought it was the right thing to do. He would tell them that people are complicated, that love is complicated, but that in the end, truth and honesty are the foundations on which real families are built. And his children, grown with families of their own by then, would understand. They would see how their father's story had shaped him into the man he became, the husband he was to their mother, the father he was to them. They would understand that legacy is not just about blood and names, but about the values we pass down, the love we show, the truth we tell. The Crawford Ranch would continue for generations, passing from Thomas to his children and beyond. But the true legacy of Jake Crawford was not the land or the cattle or the money. It was the family he built with Catherine, founded on love and truth and the hard lessons learned from a deathbed confession that changed everything. It was the understanding that secrets, no matter how well-intentioned, cause more harm than good. It was the certainty that love, real and honest and open, is the only thing that truly matters in the end. And so on that spring evening in 1900, as Jake Crawford sat on his porch with his wife in his arms and his children sleeping safely inside, he knew that he was exactly who he was meant to be. Not an orphan, not a hired hand, not even just a successful rancher. He was a husband and a father, a partner and a friend, a man who had taken the broken pieces of his past and built something beautiful. He was Jake Crawford, and he finally knew who he really was, who he was always meant to become. And that knowledge, that certainty, was the greatest gift of all.